Welcome to our Regulation Mastery session. In this session, we will continue reading the CSSF Circular 22-806 from Part 2, Requirements, in the context of ICT Outsourcing Arrangements, Chapter 2. Subchapter 2.2 Requirements to be observed with respect to outsourcing to a cloud computing infrastructure. 137. In accordance with the principle of proportionality, the in-scope entity may, if evidenced by comprehensive and robust conclusions from the assessment of the criticality and importance of functions and the risk analysis, justify not to apply the requirements set out in the following points of this circular, when the activities outsourced to a cloud computing infrastructure are not related to a critical or important function and are unlikely to become critical or important. A. Point 142c. Notification by the cloud computing service provider in case of change of functionalities. B. Point 142d. Notification by the resource operator in case of change of functionalities. C. Point 143a. Outsourcing agreement. D. Point 143b. Resiliency of the services in the EEA. 138. The in-scope entity may outsource the resource operation, as defined in point 134, to a third party, when this third party falls under one of the following two circumstances. A. The third party is authorized as OCIRC under Article 29-3 LFS. The support PSF shall also comply with the requirements of this chapter where the operation of resources is carried out for an entity which is not a regulated financial sector client. B. The third party is not authorized as OCIRC under Article 29-3 LFS, either because it is located abroad, or because it is a Luxembourg-based entity of the group to which the in-scope entity belongs, which provides operating services exclusively within the group as stated under the Article 1-1(2) CLFS. In such a case, in addition to complying with the requirements set out in this circular, the in-scope entity shall perform a prior thorough risk analysis of the activities of the resource operator, notably by verifying that the following points have been correctly addressed. I. The roles and responsibilities defined between the resource operator and the cloud computing service provider. 2. The management of the isolation of multi-tenant environments. 3. The indicators collected by the resource operator to monitor the systems and data on the cloud computing infrastructure. 4. The technical and organizational security measures implemented to access the client interfaces in order to manage the cloud computing resources, including the management of client interface access. V. The consistency of the operations and security policies defined by the resource operator with the configurations of the cloud computing resources and the planned security measures. 6. The competencies of the operators, e.g. certifications, technical training. 7. The review of the audit reports of the cloud computing service provider by the resource operator. 8. The competent authorities and the in-scope entity's right to audit the resource operator, in line with the requirements under points 88 to 100. 139. It shall be noted that an in-scope entity relying on a service provider that cumulates the activities of cloud computing service provider and resource operator is subject to the requirements of this chapter 2, provided that both activities are properly segregated, i.e. so that staff exercising the cloud computing service provider function cannot access data and thereby continues to fulfill the definition of cloud computing within the meaning of this chapter. The same applies where the service provider accumulating both functions is authorized under Article 29(3) LFS. If this segregation requirement cannot be fulfilled, the outsourcing is not considered as an outsourcing to a cloud computing infrastructure within the meaning of this chapter, but as a traditional ICT outsourcing. In such a case, only the requirements of Chapter 1 of Part 2 shall apply. 140. Cloud Officer. A. The resource operator shall designate among its employees one person, the cloud officer, who shall be responsible for the use of cloud services, and shall guarantee the competencies of the staff managing cloud computing resources, compare to point 142a. The resource operator shall assign the function of cloud officer to a qualified person that masters the challenges of outsourcing to a cloud computing infrastructure. This function may be taken up by persons that already accumulate other functions within the ICT department. B. If resource operation is performed by the in-scope entity, the cloud officer may accumulate the responsibility for the outsourcing relationship management. If the in-scope entity relies on a third party for cloud computing resource operation, the in-scope entity must know the name of the cloud officer of the resource operator. 141. Necessity to inform the competent authority. A. The notification requirements of points 59 and 60 also apply to cloud computing outsourcing arrangements. In the particular case, where an entity authorized under Article 29(3) LFS acts as an intermediary and not as a resource operator between an in-scope entity and a cloud computing service provider, the in-scope entity shall submit a notification at least 3 months before the planned outsourcing is effectively implemented for the outsourcing of critical or important functions to the cloud computing service provider. B. Any entity authorized as OCERC under Article 29(3) LFS shall request authorization from the competent authority before marketing in the following cases. I. The entity intends to act as a resource operator for its regulated financial sector clients. 2. The entity intends to provide a cloud computing infrastructure to its regulated financial sector clients, acting thus as a cloud computing service provider. 3. The entity intends to provide a cloud computing solution to its regulated financial sector clients by relying on one or more cloud computing infrastructures. This entity acts then as a sub-outsourcing cloud computing service provider. C. Without prejudice to point 119, support PFS and their branches authorized as OCERC under Article 29(3) LFS may partially outsource their resource operator services only under the conditions that compliance with point 126 and the requirements listed under point 127 are fulfilled. For the sake of clarity, a prior approval by the competent authority is therefore required as indicated in point 127e. Point 129 also applies mutatis mutandis for the provision of resource operator services.